Hello everyone, hope all of you are doing well. So our today's topic is central processing unit, in which we are going to discuss the working of computer system, the central processing unit, location of CPU and its functional components. So let's start with the working of the computer system. As we all know, the computer used to take input from the user, process it and gives the output. So the computer performs basically five major operations or functions that are: number one, it accepts input in the form of a data and instructions from the user. You are going to input a data into the computer. Either you're giving the instructions to perform something to get a desired results. These instructions are sent to the CPU through input devices, or as we know that there are the many input devices like keyboard, mouse, scanner, joystick. It can be a speaker as well, microphone. So data or programs are entered in the computer system through these devices. So input tuners takes data from the users and forward it to the computer, the CPU. The most important input device is the keyboard, which helps you to input words, figures and commands or commands from the user to the computer. The second most important device is a mouse, which is used to select options from the menus displayed on the screen. And there are the many other input devices as we talked earlier, like a scanner, joystick, and this can be a microphone as well, where you voice input to the computer. So this was the first step where computer accepts the data as an input from the user through an input devices. It can be via keyboard, it can be via mouse, or it can be the other input device. The second one is storage. If we talk about storage, it's the process of saving data and instructions permanently or can be temporarily, is known as a storage. Data has to be fed into the system before the actual processing start. It means that you have to keep a data or reserve somewhere to before processing it, before starting a process a data. It is because the processing speed of the CPU is so fast. So you have to be provide a data to the CPU with the same speed. So data is the first stored in the storage unit for faster access and the processor. So it's neat and it used to fetch a data from the storage device and then it start processing and gives you the desired results. The storage unit or the primary storage can be a hard disk or a RAM or a ROM of the computer system is designed to do the above function. It provides space of storing data and instructions. For example, you have to store your data on the primary location. It can be a hard disk, it can be a RAM, or it can be a cache where temporarily storing. It's used to fetch out the data for processing and process the data within a seconds and give you the output. The storage unit performs following major functions. The first one, all data and instructions are stored here and after processing. Then intermediate results of processing are also stored here, because while processing a data, you have to store somewhere the processed data before displaying the actual output to the user. So you have to keep data stored into the computer. So this is the storage part where you keep your intermediate, permanently or temporarily results onto the computer. The third major part is through processing. Once you take an input from the user, you store the input and temporary results, intermediate results into the computer. Now the processing, the task of performing operations like arithmetic or logical operations is called processing. Whatever the actions you are carried out on your input data or store data, this is known as processing. For example, I give you the two number 2 and 3 and I ask you to add up these two numbers. So 2 and 3 are the numbers. So you have to, if you have the paper, you will write down these two numbers on a paper. So paper will be a storage device. So what will be the processing? I am asking you to add up these two numbers. So you are adding up 2 and 3. So you will get the number. You will look at, if you forget, then you will look at your storage device, paper. What were the two numbers? That were 2 and 3. So what will be the processing? Means you are doing to addition on 2 and 3. So this is the process. Addition is the processing of the two numbers. So now again 2 plus 3. Now you can save your results. You will write down the result on your paper or keep it in your brain. So this is also the storage device. So now I ask you what will be the answer, and I'm asking you the output from you. So you will display your result, means you will tell me what will be the answer. That's the 5. So I hope you will understand the whole process. So CPU takes data instruction from the storage unit and makes all sorts of calculations based on the instructions given and the type of data provided. Means instructions are a calculation, and calculations will be performed, the type of a data, and what do you even ask. So right now I asked you the 2 plus 3, and the same time the next time hope might possible that I ask you to do multiply 4 and 5. What will be the answer? So it depends on what type of a data you are being providing and what type of instructions will run against that data. The processed answer is then sent back to the storage unit as a result, as you process the data and store it back into the storage medium uh, before displaying the actual results. Now the fourth one. First we take an input, store the inputs in the storage medium, then we process the data, and now the fourth one is the output. This is the process of producing results from the data for getting useful information. Similarly, the output produced by the computer, once you process the data, it must be kept somewhere the computer before being given to the human understandable form, because it must be stored in somewhere, so before displaying the actual information, so human readable or human understandable. Because as all we know that a computer deals with the zeros and ones, so it will not display the data with the zero as form. It will converts the whole information, process and converts all the information into the human readable form. Again, the output is stored inside the computer for further processing. Might possible you have to require the data again and again, the same data again and again. So if you want to use frequently further, so you have to store it on a permanent basis. The last function is the control. It is the way instructions and operations are executed. It controls or it monitors all of the instructions and operations that are carried out on the computer, controlling all of operations like where to input, how to process, and where to display the data performed by the control unit. It takes care of step-by-step processing of all operations inside the computer. Now, this was the general function of the computer system, which used to take input, store, process, then output, and the control all of the activities. Now we will talk about the central processing unit. So what is the central processing unit? It's the brain of the computer, or we can say that it's compute inside the computer. It is composed of million of transistors. So it it is composed of a million of transistors, so it will be so small, and sometimes or might also referred as microprocessors. The today's CPUs are also called an integrated chips, means the several types of components are integrated into the small silicon chip. It carries out the instructions from computer program to perform arithmetic or logic or any kind of input or operations of the system. It also, as we talked earlier, it converts data into meaningful information. This is also a control center which control all the devices connected to the computer and all the operations carried out on it. This is a set of electronic circuitry that execute stored program instruction. The stored program instructions. What do you think? Can the CPU function without human instructions? As we said, that CPU is just like a human brain. What do you think? Can CPU be capable to do the work without human instructions? No. No, CPU cannot function itself. We have to give instructions to the CPU. Yes, it is true that the CPU can perform the instructions in a very fast manner. It's very accurate and super fast, but CPU is not capable to do any task by its own. It don't have an ability to think itself. These instructions are pre-written and saved into the computer memory so that the computer can read and execute them. As we said before, that CPU follows the stored program instructions. So these are stored instructions for the CPU are known as computer program that are pre-written, pre-saved for to perform a given task. So now let's see how data are represented in the CPU. As we all know that computer deals with the binary digits 0 and 1. So CPU is a digital circuit which deals with digital signals. So as we know that computer store the data in the form of a 0 and 1, that is a bit, and the combination of bits make a byte. So that means combination of zeros and the ones and the combination of bits represents the data in the computer. For example, if you want to type capital A, so your computer will shown as A will be shown as to your computer or the CPU is 01000001 or 01 penta zeros 1. So computer never knows that what is capital A. He only knows that if there will be a code or whether a series of a bit or combination of bits will be 01 penta zeros and 1, then you have to display this letter. So just recall in a second what is CPU. Is a digital circuit, is a brain of a computer that processes data according to a given task or given instructions. It runs in the background for each and every task that takes place in the computer. So CPU is a brain of a computer that processes data according to given instructions or and runs in the background to perform the task that carry out of the computer. Hey, I know that the CPU is the most important part of the computer. I came to know now. But what are its functions? A CPU works like a human brain. It has 3 units to do specific function. Let's talk about them. Now we will talk about the main function of CPU. As we know, that's the brain of a computer, carry out all the processing. It works with the pre-stored instructions, which is known as a computer program. It performs arithmetic calculations that are basic to complex, the multiplication, division, addition, and so on, and data manipulation such as comparison, sorting, combining, and even though decisions making as well. So CPU read instructions and execute them one by one. Whatever task you are given to it, it will read instructions first and then perform them step by step. So there is a, if we talk about the major and the main function of a CPU, there will be only one function that will comes in our mind. CPU cannot work in its own without the given instructions or predefined instructions. Like a human brain don't need predefined instructions. So these instructions are stored in the computer that is known as a computer program. So what will be the main function of a CPU? It reads instructions and execute them one by one. So now we will goes to the location of CPU. So this is a general computer system. Everyone is familiar with that. So can you tell me the what you are being seen over here? So here you can see the system unit, display monitor, that also known as visual display unit, VDU. There are the speakers, keyboard, and the mouse. So these are the most essential part and the common parts that every computer system had it. So there are the other peripheral devices as well, like the printer, scanner, joystick as well, that as per requirement you can attach with your system. Are you able to see the CPU in here in this device in this system? No. So just focus on this green area, the system unit. Will you be able to see? Still not. So let's open the system unit. Take out the back of the system unit, and now you can see inside the system unit there is a yellow rectangular box. It's been shown, that is known as motherboard. And next to the motherboard there is a power supply. You can see over here there is also a CD DVD drive where you can put up your CD and run it on your computer. There is a hard disk with the storage purpose. So you are still unable to see the CPU. So let's see the motherboard. Over here, right up the CPU there is a heat sink, and over the heat sink there is a CPU fan. So still you are unable to see the CPU. So what is the purpose of the CPU fan and the heat sink right over the CPU? Because as we know that the CPU is made of the billion or the trillion of transistors. So when it starts working, it produces a heat. So keep them safe to be burned out. So there will be the heat sink right up over the CPU, and there is a CPU fan that release the heat from the CPU. So it keeps safe to burn melted due to the overheat. Now here you can see that the CPU and CPU socket. So CPU is inserted directly into the CPU socket, that means side down on the motherboard. Now all of you know the location of the CPU, where it is located. It's inside the system unit, fixed into the CPU socket on the motherboard. So let's talk about the components of the central processing unit. To understand the components of central processing unit, we have to go through with this diagram where we can see that we have talked the main functions of the computers, which was input given to the CPU. CPU used to process all of the task or the input and then gives us the output. Now CPU or central processing unit has the three main functions, which are control unit, arithmetic logic unit, memory unit, and there is also the backing storage, that is the secondary storage, you can say, where you can store data permanently. So there is another closed diagram of the CPU, which is known as a block diagram, where input central processing unit is further divided into the ALU, arithmetic logic unit, CU, which is a control unit, and there is also a memory unit or a memory register, which further divided into the ROM, read-only memory, RAM, random access memory, and the cache as well. And it also linked with the storage, secondary storage. This is a primary memory and the secondary memory, and there is an output linked to the CPU. Now here we can see that the CPU takes input from the user, process, perform all mathematical calculations in ALU, and all calculations, all the tasks carried out through the ALU. From memory unit, it used to take when you used to get the input from the user, temporarily stored in the memory unit, and the CPU takes that input from the memory to perform or to process the instructions, to process that task, and again it used to store it into the memory unit to fetch the data to produce an output. And control unit used to monitor all of the activities carried out by central processing unit. So let's see what is the purpose of ALU, CU, and MU in short. Basically, ALU stands for Arithmetic Logic Unit that performs simple arithmetic and logical operations like means comparison, as we talked earlier, comparison and the basic mathematical operations. And there are the control units that reads and interprets the instructions from memory and transform them into a series of signals to activate other parts of the computer. Means it used to send the signal from one part of the computer to the other part. Now it's your turn to perform these steps. MU, memory unit, or a register is the part of the computer that holds the data and instruction for processing or for further saving. So that's all about today's lesson. So if you have any query, any question, you can ask, feel free. So is there no question? Let's quickly revise. What is the brain of a computer? Name quickly. CPU. Where it is located? It is located inside the mother system unit on the motherboard. That's good. What are the three main functions of the CPU? ALU, CU, and but these are not the function, these are the components. Right. ALU, CU, and the memory unit are the components of CPU. And the main function of the CPU, it is used to execute, read the instructions, and process those instructions. Okay, that's all.